Hello everyone, it is Joe here from Omnipoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCGO codes, including the stuff from Evolving Skies, make sure you go ahead and check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your order using that code Omnipoke. For today's video, we are looking over the results of the Kyoto Champions League 2022. This format of the 1,000+ player tournament was team up all the way up to the new Fusion Strike. So yes, there are some cards that we can't use, so it's not exactly a one-to-one for a future format for us, but it can give us some good insight into the best performing decks when Fusion Strike's out. So we can have a few deck lists to look over here. I do just want to jump over to Twitter because Franco Takahashi, who was at the tournament, was reporting on it and told us a breakdown of the top 16 lists. There was 6 Mew VMAX, the new archetype from Fusion Strike, 3 Suicune, 3 ADP, which is like a toolbox, 1 Vikavolt, which is also from Fusion Strike, 1 Eternatus, 1 Rapid Strike Malamar, and 1 Genesect V, which is also a Fusion Strike card. So it looks like the Mew is kind of the big winner, and there's plenty of other stuff that we'll look at deck list wise for what's going on here. But the overall winning deck was actually Ice Rider, Suicune, Inteleon, which we basically have all the pieces for in standard. It's doing like pretty well. It's not the best performing deck for us right now. There are a few differences that we are unable to use. The stamps are one of the biggest ones that stand out to me. It does also have a Marshadow in here, which would be an answer to your own path potentially, or just swell so you can lock in path, I guess is kind of the idea here. But really it's very, very similar to what we really know in our standard. Only really things to note. Obviously we can't play com, so our ball search count would be slightly different, but there's actually no capture energy in this list. And obviously the Ice Rider lists go heavier on the water energy route rather than like a Suicune Ludicolo, for example, because you have much more water in your attack cost. But just 8 energy and the 2 buckets is still like slightly on that lower side compared to some other Suicune lists that we see at the moment. But yeah, otherwise it's very close to what we could be playing. So really not too much that we need to explain here. Just sort of solidifies this as one of the stronger archetypes. And from what we can tell, it doesn't feel that bad into the Fusion Strike matchups. So that's also something good to note. It means that we're not terrified of anything coming out from Fusion Strike necessarily for Ice Rider Suicune. So it seems safe, at least, going into the next format. And I've been touting this archetype over the Ludicolo build for a long time, so it's pretty cool to see it doing well in this occasion. Then I believe this is the same list, but the original tweet, I guess. Everything looks to be the same. Yeah. So there's your champion there, and obviously the trophy, or the trophy card is the giveaway there. The runner-up was actually Malamar, Rapid Strike. We don't have the list, unfortunately, but one thing to note as a key difference, I would say, of Rapid Strike Malamar is that they were able to play Oricorio, which is a big way to like boost your damage throughout the game and make sure that you can reach one-hit KOs. As you can see pictured, there is a Medicham V, and this list did play Inteleon as well. So I imagine they played a mixture of Inteleon line, so they could use some pings and Malamar to get themselves in range of a Medicham play. Medicham being really cool because buying you a turn buys you lots of cards to get one-hit KOs. Like, if you fall just shy of a KO, you can then go Medicham whilst you build your hand for the next KO. So I think that's pretty interesting. Maybe it's mandatory in Malamar because of Reset Stamp in their format, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a way that we play it going forward, but that's just a small quirk there. And you can see more of the trophy cards going on. One interesting tidbit about the Victini, I believe they printed the old attacks on this Victini when it was meant to be the Battle Styles attacks, and I think they printed the old ones. Just a small tidbit there that I saw in passing, or heard about in passing, but anyway. Next up we have the senior champion, which is ADP Bird Box, basically, as you can see here. Very solid type coverage toolbox going on. Galarian Moltres does hit for weakness on Mew from the Fusion Strike set. So I imagine that's one of the reasons why ADP Bird Box is still relevant. Even though we see a lot less Shadow Rider, the Moltres will be hitting the Mew for weakness, which is something really important, I would say. The senior runner-up was a Gengar and Umbreon VMAX deck. So Gengar is also coming out in Fusion Strike. Definitely something to bear in mind. It didn't make top 16 in Masters, but I know it's being played a good amount in Japan. And obviously at the moment we only have a single strike to go off of. But Gengar is looking possibly to replace the Urshifu, maybe. It's not guaranteed, but it could be something that happens. Gengar has just a 2 energy attack cost to do very meaningful damage, so you're not quite as reliant on Houndooms, which could be a good direction for single strike, so something to bear in mind. Luke Metalization won in juniors, and the runner-up was the Fusion Strike Mew VMAX, so that's looking pretty good. Also in top 4 of Masters, we see our first Mew VMAX deck. So let's try and get this in full screen here so we can really look at it. So there's a lot to dissect. I'll remind you of a few of the cards here. The tablets over here are essentially Electro Powers for Fusion Strike Pokemon. We have the Alessa, which allows us to accelerate the special energy from the deck, which is very solid, which is a rainbow energy that also means that you can't be affected by your opponent's abilities, which is kind of good. Stops you being hit with like Inteleon pings, for example, which is kind of nice. This list does have the ability to play Swell and Marshadow, which is a fog crystallable target, which means they can lean heavily on a Peony engine. And I'm not sure this would translate over to our format, because of course we don't have Swell, which makes this approach far more risky, I would say. Because it seems like Japan have lent into the Peony engine quite a lot with the Fusion Strike deck. It allows you to play the tablets and, you know, guarantee them on the right turn for huge damage power spikes. It can also get you into the cross switchers, which when you play 2 at once allow you to have a Guzma style effect, which is very, very strong as well. And then you can just top your hand up with the Genesect that draws you cards for the number of Fusion Strike Pokemon that you have in play. And this deck is obviously mostly Fusion Strike Pokemon. The only things are the Marshadow, which takes itself out of play when you use it, and then the Dedenne in here. So the 4 Genesect really are going to be the sort of draw engine as you go. And it means that, as you can see, there's very few draw supporters in here at all. You actually play things like Red's Challenge to lower your hand size, grab a key piece, and top back up cards with the Genesect. So a very different engine to what we're used to. Of course, we can't use Red's Challenge in our format, and Peony gets riskier when we can't play Swell and Marshadow to get rid of Path to the Peak. So I don't know if we'll be able to have this one-to-one crossover, but I do think it's really important to look at a list like this and see how we actually can adapt things, because there's some cool stuff going on here for sure. We can't play Weak Guard Energy either, and that may mean that we play more of a toolboxy Mew deck, maybe a thinner Mew engine, still having things like Genesect and maybe even Saucer in our format, so we can not just fold to dark archetypes. So that's something, again, that we should sort of keep an eye on and stress that it is slightly different in our meta to the Japanese format. They have better defenses against Umbreon and against Moltres, which we possibly won't have. A few other cards that you may not recognize. This is Battle Pass. You play your 1 copy. It allows you to grab 2 basics, I believe, and put them straight into your hand if it's your first turn of the game. Jack has got all the scans prepared for us for when we need to do a set list. I think I have it here. Yeah, Battle VIP Pass. So yeah, search your deck for 2 basics, put them in. Straight direct to bench. Okay, but yeah, it's on your first turn, and when you play the 3 Peony, you have reasonable access to get double basic for the price of 1, which is kind of nice. I don't even know how relevant that really is when you already have the fog crystals to get your Mews out early. But obviously getting extra Genesect is super good. So the attacks of Mew, let's actually go back to these scans. So to familiarize yourselves more with the Fusion package, because it's obviously the best performer really from this tournament, even though it didn't win, it was the highest quantity of top 16, and it did make top 4 at least. So the Mew can do a 130, which gets through all effects. So you're wall breaking, so you're not worried about like Zamazenta. You're not worried about like Decidueye, those sorts of things. But cross fusion is the main element of this deck. You can choose one of your bench fusion Pokemon and use its attacks. So you can use that Genesect, which is a draw engine, but also it does 210 for just 2 attachments via the Mew. And this can't attack next turn, but Mew naturally has a free retreat cost, which is crazy. It makes those cross switches even better as well. You can just free retreat cross switcher and get back using that Genesect attack. And 210 can be buffed, of course, by the tablets. Then you have the Mew V, which is also pretty good. The Psycho Jump can do 70, and you shuffle yourself back into your deck, so you can tank a hit with the VMAX, and then do the 70 to like finish something off that you've hit maybe with Genesect earlier, something like that, and deny those prize cards from the opponent, which is also pretty good. And then the last attacker that's being utilized here, the Oricorio is mostly here just for reducing damage that your Fusion Strike Pokemon take by 20. But the Latias we have here is preventing VMAXs from hitting you. It is a 3 energy attack cost that you can turn down to a 2 energy attack cost, but 70 and prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks from Pokemon VMAX seems very good for a ton of archetypes. This is potentially another defense around like Umbreon, Gengar, those sorts of things. Obviously, the Umbreon V can still hit you, so that's something to bear in mind, and it doesn't help you against Moltres, but maybe that's decent there. And just in other matchups, that 70 sounds like a low baseline, but you have your tablets to improve that damage output. So I think the Mew, just with that little package, seems to be very, very solid here, and I'm really excited to get testing with this archetype. I am a little skeptical of the Peony engine when we've seen so many Marnie Path builds out there right now, and that we have far less good defenses than the Japanese meta has, because of the cards from Team Up and Chaotic Swell. And we don't have that easy way to cover your weakness, which is Dark Weakness, which we know at the moment is one of the reasons why Shadow Rider is being sort of kept out of the meta, and keeping it, you know, at the high end of the top 10 rather than towards the tier 1. It's because Umbreon just tears through you, and that could still be the case for a heavily Mew focus list. I've mostly been testing with a Genesect, theory crafting a Genesect focus list, and maybe having like a 1-1 or 2-2 Mew package in there, because it's less hungry for energies than the Genesects themselves. So just something I'm sort of spitballing ideas with, but it just shows us a really good baseline for a strong 16. It shows us that the Fusion Strike cards are coming in full force, and the Mew is obviously the flagship card of the set, and the Genesect is the engine that really enables that. So it's looking very powerful and promising from there. Otherwise, what have we got going on here? We have a very exciting Vikavolt Inteleon archetype. Now, again, this does not translate over because the main element of this archetype is the battery charger bug, which we don't have available to us. But essentially, the Vikavolt does a 200 damage snipe for the 2 lightning, 2 colorless cost anywhere that you want, and that's really, really insane. Obviously, there's no bench. Well, there is bench protection in their format, but it's not all that useful anyway because there's like pings and stuff, and you can deal with Mew in that regard. But essentially, this deck works because you have Rescue Carrier for the Charger Bugs, which gets you back double. Well, the 2 energy attack cost for you to spam the 200 snipe, which is pretty crazy, realistically. So very cool to see a double stage 2 deck actually doing very well, where you have high damage output that's also just sniping stuff down. So that's pretty wild. Only playing 1 ping Inteleon feels a little bit weird to me, because I think you need to deal with Genesect quite a lot, and they have the reduction of 20, so you like always would want that Inteleon in play. But I guess space is like super premium when you're playing double stage 2. But yeah, very spicy that this deck was able to sort of make it over the line. And, you know, we haven't seen quite as much, you know, like Dragapult. We haven't seen quite as much like Jolteon, those sorts of archetypes in the Japanese format at all. And that's what's really keeping the one prize archetypes at bay for us right now. And obviously ADP is even in their format, and they still made top 4. So very wacky that they were able to get this done. So props to the Vikavolt player. It clearly wasn't a popular archetype, kind of rogue, but yeah, insane run from that list. I wouldn't expect it to be converting, though, because we don't have battery charger bug, unfortunately. In top 8, we saw more Mew. There was a Crushing Hammer Mew, so hammers are still a thing, even in Japan. There's a more ADP Toolbox deck. I imagine, like, we don't see the birds here, but I imagine most of their lists are Aurora-based and they play the birds. You'd kind of be silly not to play the birds when you expect Mew, of course. Then we have another, this is a top 16 list, and it's playing pretty much the same attackers, still playing the Peony engine. What else is going on here? So this is playing Great Balls rather than, well, it's reducing its incense count, I guess. Slightly different energy counts. I'm really surprised that it plays 2 Elisa and only 2 of those energies, though. That sounds really weird, because the Elisa pulls from deck, I'm pretty sure. So that's a strange count going on there. It's playing catchers, so a little bit wacky, but there you go. Fog Crystal obviously is what enables and gives you a reason to still play basic psychics, just to play a low count and then you just pull them out when you need them, which is nice. Then we have more top 16 stuff going on. Don't really see a list here. More Mew, if you turn your head round, there it is. Suicune, Intel doing fine. I believe this is just not playing the Ludicolo that we're used to, just quad Suicune basically being aggressive. Genesect was making top 16 as well, so doesn't necessarily need the Mew to be that strong, and I'm still hedging my bets that Genesect will be good enough on his own as an archetype, potentially. There was a... this is an Eternatus Umbreon as well. Obviously, Eternatus maybe being given a second chance just by the power of Mew, and obviously you can hit them for weakness, which is kind of interesting. And then we jump down to some top 16 stuff. More Suicune archetypes. Intel Ursh, pretty decent. Obviously, converts over in our format. More Ice Rider. More Urshifu, which is kind of cool. So there was still some good spread decks going on there. There's a Luke Metal as well. But yeah, just a really nice intro, really, to this format. And makes me very excited for Fusion Strike. It's actually not that far away, so we will be testing it very soon and getting some tabletop gameplay on our stream. And starting to really discover these archetypes that little bit more, because as much as these are really good baselines, I think we can't go quite as greedy, quite as streamlined as the list that we've seen from from Japan, which makes me a little bit more skeptical about the Mew build. Let's show it one more time. As good as I think it is for their formats, I think we'll have to be craftier than they are. We can't just jam those weakness cards, unfortunately. We have to try and work the Mew in while still having Genesect probably as like a front runner in the deck. But the Latiasam's cool to see. The cross switchers actually seeing play and leaning into that peony was very spicy. Maybe we could find a 4-off stadium that we just play in general, and try and have lots of counter stadium and still go down that peony route. Obviously we can play Fog Crystal Marshadow. Maybe Scoop Up Net is a card that ends up coming into the list as well, so you can just like peony for net, pick up your Marshadow once you've found it once, and you can replace that stadium once again. So there's a few ideas flying around, but I do like a lot of things here. I like the very, very high item usage, because you're wanting to use as many Genesects as you can per turn, right? It's essentially an auxiliary effect. Once you have your Fusion Strike Pokemon in play, you can draw up to 6 essentially each turn for each Genesect. So you constantly want to be slamming down your cards pretty much immediately, so you can top up once, twice, 3 times with your own Genesect board, essentially. So you want very few supporters, knowing that you can just filter your deck of your trainer cards, your insta plays, to get towards them, and then the peony throws away what you don't need, cherry picks some big items for power spike tablet turns, some really nice cross switcher plays, so you can jump in and out of your Mew / Genesect. So yeah, I'm excited to see how it turns out in our format, because it is one of the biggest options that we have for Fusion Strike. Just quickly going over the scans while we're here. So I think the Vikavolt we can give a nod to, but I really don't think it's going to be doing all that well in our standard. There's potential for the Bolton VMAX being an energy spread deck. There's Greedent. But the Fusion Strike stuff seems to be the biggest thing that we're getting from this set, outside of potentially Inteleon, which we haven't been able to use just yet. It wasn't doing too well in the Japanese meta, though. Bear that in mind. And there is then the Gengar joining potentially Single Strike. Those are kind of the biggest flagship cards from the upcoming set. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how things get on. Let me know your thoughts about the tournament. What decks did you really like seeing? What were you surprised to not see at the top tables of the Japanese format? And yeah, I will see you in another video very soon. So cheers.